Cesare Borgia. You've heard the name. For 5 centuries, it's basically been a synonym for cruelty, for ruthless ambition, and for the absolute darkest side of Renaissance politics. He's the ultimate villain, right? Accused of everything from murdering his own brother to poisoning cardinals just to get their money. He's the man who literally carved out a kingdom for himself with a brutality that shocked an age that was, well, already pretty shocking. He is the original Prince of Fear.
And, this sentiment right here, this is the bedrock of his entire myth. Whenever there's a mysterious crime in Renaissance Italy, a convenient death, a political backstabbing, history just points its finger in one direction: Cesare Borgia. It's like the case is already closed before it's even opened.
But here's the thing. What if it's not that simple? What if that verdict of history is actually a carefully constructed lie? A piece of political propaganda that's just been repeated so many times over so many centuries that we've all accepted it as fact? What if the monster we all think we know is actually just a ghost, a boogeyman invented by the people he beat at their own game?
To even begin to answer that, we're going to turn to our guide for this deep dive. This incredible book from 1912 by Raphael Sabatini. And what makes it so perfect for our purposes is how he frames it. This isn't just another biography. He calls it an inquiry into the charges. He's not just telling a story. He's acting as a defense attorney, cross-examining 400 years of history.
Okay, so here's our game plan for unraveling this thing. We're going to follow Sabatini's lead. First, we'll look at the terrifying legend itself, the Borgia boogeyman. Then, we'll zoom out and look at the incredibly violent world he lived in. From there, we'll put one of the most famous accusations against him, poisoning, under the microscope. We'll see what his most brilliant contemporary actually thought of him, and then finally, we'll try to pull it all together and separate the man from the monster, and from the myth.
All right, first things first, we have to face the legend head-on. Because we're not just talking about a historical figure. Cesare Borgia has become the Renaissance boogeyman. His name itself is a story, a warning.
And the popular image of this guy is crystal clear, and it is terrifying. He's the master of poison, the guy with the poison ring who can kill you with a handshake. He's the military genius, leading these lightning-fast campaigns across Italy with an efficiency that just horrified his enemies. And he's the ultimate political operator, the kind of guy who would invite you to a lavish dinner, only for you to be strangled before dessert. This is the Cesare Borgia of legend, a man for whom cruelty was not just a tool, it was an art form.
But, and this is a huge but, this is where Sabatini's investigation really begins. He insists that to understand the man, you absolutely have to understand the brutal, chaotic, and frankly, corrupt era he lived in. You just can't judge a 15th century prince by 21st century standards. It doesn't work.
And wow, does Sabatini paint a picture of that world. Just listen to that description. It's a world where popes lead armies into battle, where you could hire an assassin as easily as you could hire a carpenter, and where betrayal wasn't the exception, it was the rule. This was the stage, and Cesare Borgia was one of its star players.
And this is probably one of the most important things to get straight. The Borgias did not invent this world. They were born into it. The idea that Cesare's father, Pope Alexander VI, brought corruption to the Vatican is, well, it's just bad history. He inherited a system that was already completely rotten. The difference was, he and his son figured out how to master that system, how to weaponize its corruption in a way their enemies could only dream of.
I mean, just take a look at the popes who came right before the Borgias. You had Sixtus IV, who basically treated the church like his personal family business, handing out powerful positions to his nephews, who everyone knew were really his sons. Then his successor, Innocent VIII, was even more open about it. He was the first pope to flat-out acknowledge his own kids, and he turned the selling of indulgences, basically get-out-of-purgatory free cards, into a massive industrial-scale business. This was the game the Borgias walked into. The rules were already dirty.
Okay, so now that we've set the stage, let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's test one of these accusations. And to really deconstruct the Borgia myth, Sabatini goes right for the jugular, the charge that they were masters of poison. And there is no better case study than the mysterious death of an Ottoman prince named Cem.
So here's the accusation. It's a classic Borgia tale. The story goes that Pope Alexander used a secret, slow-acting white powder, a Borgia specialty, to poison Prince Cem right before having to hand him over to an invading French king. It's sinister, it's sneaky, it fits the narrative perfectly. But let's actually look at the facts.
When you actually lay out the timeline, the story starts to fall apart. Look at this. Gem leaves the Pope's control on January 25th. He then travels with the French army. It isn't until February 25th, a full month later, that he dies, deep inside French-held territory. For the poison story to be true, you have to believe in a poison so incredibly advanced and precise that it takes exactly 28 days to kill someone. Sabatini points out that's pure fiction. The poisons of this era were nasty, brutish, and fast.
And it gets even worse for the accusers. I mean, check this out. The historians who spread this story couldn't even get their facts straight. One says Gem died in Terracina, another says it was Gaeta, a third claims it was Naples. The actual location, the one we can verify, was Capua. When your key witnesses can't even agree on the scene of the crime, you don't have a case.
So, okay, the evidence is a mess. But let's ask the most basic question you ask in any criminal investigation. What was the motive? Why on earth would Pope Alexander want to kill Prince de Gen?
The answer is this number: 40,000 ducats. That's how much the Ottoman Sultan was paying the Pope every single year to keep his brother Gem alive and under Vatican guard. Prince Gem wasn't a hostage, he was a cash cow. Right, so the Pope had a massive 40,000 ducat a year reason to keep this prince alive and well. And we don't have to guess about this. A Venetian chronicler at the time, Marin Sanuto, spelled it out. He wrote that Gem's death was a huge financial hit for the Pope, and because of that, the idea that the Pope poisoned him was not to be believed. It was simply very bad for business. Okay, so we've heard from the haters and the gossips. Now let's turn to someone who saw Cesare Borgia up close, someone with a cold, analytical eye, a true political genius, Niccolo Machiavelli. And his verdict on Cesare was, well, it was radically different. And what Machiavelli had to say is, honestly, it's mind-blowing. Forget the monster, forget the poisoner. Machiavelli, the guy who literally wrote the book on modern politics, looked at Cesare Borgia and saw a blueprint. He saw the perfect role model for any leader trying to build a new state from scratch. And you have to understand, this is the crucial difference in perspective. Machiavelli wasn't writing a moral textbook, he was writing a how-to guide for power. He watched Cesare march into a chaotic region of Italy and bring it to heel with this incredible mix of shocking violence and brilliant government. Machiavelli saw Cesare put a cruel deputy in charge to crush all opposition, and then, once order was restored, saw Cesare have that same deputy publicly hacked to pieces to win the favor of the people. It was brutal, yes, it was cynical, but to Machiavelli, it was pure political genius. Cesare wasn't just a thug, he was a nation builder.
So, where does all of this leave us? We've waded through the myth, we've looked at the world he lived in, we've dissected the evidence. It's time to bring it all together and take another look at that verdict of history.
So on one hand, you've got the myth we all know, Cesare the monster, totally unique in his evil. But on the other hand, what Sabatini shows us is something way more complicated. A man who was, without a doubt, ruthless, but also a brilliant general, an innovative administrator, and a visionary. He wasn't just a product of his violent times, he perfected their methods. He turned the dirty game of Renaissance politics into a science.
In the end, Sabatini's conclusion is pretty stark. He argues that the whole Borgia legend is basically a 500-year-old smear campaign. Think about it. The Borgias were outsiders. They were Spaniards in Italy. They were ambitious, they were powerful, and worst of all, they were successful. And as the book says, when you achieve greatness, you make enemies. And envy? Well, envy is the most fertile ground there is for hate. Their rivals couldn't beat them on the battlefield, so they decided to assassinate their character instead. And they did a very, very good job.
And that leaves us with one last, kind of unsettling question, doesn't it? The evidence points to a complex, brilliant, and yes, ruthless political operator, a man perfectly suited to his violent times. And yet, for half a millennium, we have chosen to believe in the story of the simple, blood-drinking monster. So you have to ask yourself, why do we find the simple myth so much more appealing than the complex and maybe even more terrifying truth of the man?